Let's draw two paths disappearing into the distance. This first path is like many paths I've seen drawn. So first, we'll get the distance. And it's a long way away. So we'll put some trees in the distance. Now we have our distance. Now our path. Now we know that when paths go into the distance, they disappear in a point, or they can anyway. And that's the sort of path we want to draw now. So there's our path disappearing into the distance. Now our path, as many paths do, has segments. It's a bit of a meadow around our path, so we want to put some grass and things. And it's getting further away, so we'll make our grass a bit smaller as it gets further away and as the path gets further away too. And there we have our path disappearing into the distance. I've seen many paths such as this in drawings. Let's look at another way that in lots of ways is extremely similar to this, but far more effective in creating a realistic effect. And then we'll compare the two. This path also needs a horizon to go to. And it's also going to have trees in the distance. And this path is also going to have some sections where the concrete path is divided. And we're also going to put just some little bits of stone and dirt and stuff which ends up being kicked onto pathways. Of course, we need flowers and grass growing by the side of our path. And some tufts of grass, lots of tufts of grass because there's lots of grass in a meadow. And there we have our path disappearing into the distance. It did make me remember that I actually forgot to put the gravelly bits on our first path. And there we have it. So we have two paths disappearing into the distance. Now let's compare these two paths. Now which one looks more realistic and why is that? First though, a quick reminder that when we're looking at objects that are in a straight line, as they get further away from us, they get narrower and narrower. They get more compressed as they move further away. And we can see that really clearly in this streetscape, where these windows here, we see quite a lot of detail. But the further along the street we go, the windows get narrower and narrower and we don't see as much detail. And not just the windows, but the width of entire buildings gets narrower and narrower until finally, up the end here, there isn't room to draw the lines. They're so close together for the windows. And we have to adopt a totally different way of drawing them up here than we do up here. But that's okay because as we see further away, we actually don't see as much detail as things that are closer. This is one of the aspects of perspective and it's called foreshortening. It's important when we draw buildings, particularly with architectural elements such as windows, because both the windows and the gaps between the windows get shorter and shorter. Now you might ask, what has this got to do with paths? Well, if I turn it this way, is it more obvious? Now all of these windows are the same width and they're also the same distance apart. But the further away they go, the more compressed they become, the closer the gaps become. Now, how fast the compression happens, how quickly the lines become closer and closer together, depends on how angled away from us the building is becoming. So in this building, we're starting to get close to being side onto it. So the visual compression is happening very fast. These arches become very narrow very quickly. More quickly than here, where we're more side on to seeing these windows than the arches. So remembering this, and this is the effect we're wanting, let's go back and look at our pathway side by side. So the pathway, of course, is moving further and further away from us. And so the visual compression is happening. Instead of going sideways with a row of windows, it's going upwards. And while we don't have windows, we do have these sections of pathway that are laid out on the path. And so with foreshortening, the space between these lines gets narrower and narrower and narrower as they move further away from us. And we've also noticed that we don't see the detail as well as it moves further away. And so we actually stop seeing these lines because the lines themselves become so thin and so close together. They just become part of the general colour of the pathway. In this pathway, that hasn't happened. The gaps between the lines have stayed closer to the same width for much longer. And can you see the effect this creates? It makes this pathway look like it's standing upwards, almost like a pyramid. Whereas this one feels like it's sitting flat on the ground and moving away from us. Another important thing as things move further away is to draw with a lighter touch because we don't see things as clearly. And so you have to look hard even to see the lines where the path ends. And in real life, you probably only distinguish the path right up here, perhaps by the colour difference between the path and the fields. Whereas with this one, with the lines drawn the same width right up to the end, in fact, they're even heavier at the end because I started on the horizon and then drew down. Again, we don't get that sense of tailoring off into the distance the way we do with the line getting lighter. The line, in fact, even becomes broken as it becomes lighter. And as it gets closer to us, not just does it get darker, but it actually becomes two lines to increase the sense of closeness. Now, foreshortening also works with the flowers and the grass on each side. And it's a similar thing. Although these items are randomly placed, they become compressed. They get smaller and tighter as they move away from us. And we see them with less detail. So the very closest flowers and grasses are drawn quite distinctly and quite large and with a fairly heavy pen. But I draw with a lighter touch and they get very small very quickly. Although these ones did get small, they didn't get smaller nearly as quickly. And in fact, we were still drawing suggestions of them right up to the end. Whereas with these ones, really by just over halfway, we weren't really drawing much at all. And even the dots higher up became very faint dashes, which of course are thinner and represent that foreshortening that we see in the other parts of our drawing. And the same thing happened again with the gravel. We need to foreshorten the dirt and the gravel and the stones that's been kicked onto the pathway. And so it's rounder and clearer the closer it is to us. And as it moves further away, it very rapidly becomes more elongated, becomes thinner and lighter. And dots become thin dashes that disappear altogether. On this side, although they did become a bit smaller as they went up, they still basically were rounded shapes, which doesn't give the sense of foreshortening, where circles become ovals and ellipses and can then become straight lines as we're looking more side on at them as they move further away from us. And although we know this is a pathway because of its shape, because we've got trees and grass around it, this one feels much more like it's disappearing into the distance. It doesn't take any longer to draw this way. So if we want to draw a realistic pathway, these are some of the techniques we can use to create on paper the sorts of effects we see in life as things go into the distance. I'm Stephen Travers. Please subscribe for more videos with more drawing tips, techniques and demos. I'll see you next time. Bye.